Welcome viewers to this panel discussion on Budget 2022. We have a very distinguished panel to join us. We have in front of me is Mr. Richard Mackinder, who is lead on indirect tax for Deloitte, as well as lead for corporate secretarial services, and he's also known as a taxman. To his left is Desmond Chu, who is Assistant Secretary General at the NTUC and Member of Parliament for Tampines GRC. On his left is Barnabas Gan, economist at UOB, which is also a sponsor of this event. Thank you, Barnabas. And to his left is Mr. Lam Yi Yang, who is Chief Executive Officer of the Singapore Business Federation, which is the largest business group in Singapore. He was also formerly from the Ministry of Finance, as well as the Ministry of Trade and Industry. So he's been an insider in crafting previous budgets. So welcome, gentlemen, and thank you for joining us. I know our title is Building Resilience Amid Recovery, but I think it's interesting what the title of the budget was, which is Charting Our New Way Forward Together. I thought that was an interesting title. I mean, a new way forward suggests there's something new, there's a break from the past, and then there's the word together, which suggests inclusiveness. And I thought the title actually is not so innocuous as it seems. It gives us a clue as to what the budget was all about. So before we get into the details of the budget, if I may just ask you very briefly to tell me your main takeaways from the budget as a whole in maybe 30 seconds to 1 minute. Starting with you, Richard.
Well, you called me the tax man, so I guess my take is that taxes have to move to be able to address the costs that Singapore has incurred over the pandemic, and also looking forward to make sure that Singapore is ready for the future. So my takeaway would be that we can see that reality coming through, and you can see the cost that has been incurred as a result.
Right. Desmond, for you?
Well, to me, it's a huge confidence builder. I think for anybody who heard the budget, it's a big signal that we're moving from COVID crisis mode to building for the future. I think quite critically, I think it also signifies the building of a new social compact with Singaporeans and the Singaporean worker. So it tackles three things, I think quite important. One is anxieties about global competition. The other one is on inequalities, right? And the third thing is what must we do to thrive in the new world order? So this budget is quite comprehensive in allowing the Singaporean and Singaporean worker to achieve that.
Thank you. Barnabas, yourself, including what might have surprised you?
Well, I think the budget to me is a very fine balance between addressing Singapore's short-term needs, but also having a very good focus on the medium to long-term priorities of Singapore. And there's something for the households, something for businesses. A very big thing is on the green economy, and last but not least, in order to finance everything like that and to give a more sort of resilient, prudent budget into the subsequent years, the enhancement of the taxes in Singapore. And what really surprised me, I would dare say, really, is the timing of the GST rate. Yeah.
Okay, we'll get into that in a minute. Mr. Lam, your take on the budget?
Well, I think if we take a step back and compare it with the budget in the last 2 years, I think 2020, the budgets then was really very much about survival, helping companies to survive the sudden onset of COVID. And last year in 2021, the budget pivoted to be more about helping companies in terms of recovery, how to recover from the crisis. And this year, there's a very strong focus on growth, on the future. How can we grow further in this post-pandemic or endemic world? And I think that is very important message of optimism and hope for companies to say that there is a way forward for Singapore's economy, and that this is the path we're going to go to grow. But at the same time, I thought it's a very well-balanced budget. Besides the future-oriented part of it, there was also the part about helping the sectors that are still impacted by COVID, particularly SMEs. So a good balance between the future as well as the immediate needs.
Well, thank you for those summary observations. Now we can get into some of the details. Starting with, of course, one of the biggest highlights of the budget, which was the increase in the GST. I think, well, some people did not expect this, but we have a two-step hike in the GST. 1 percentage point at a time in 2023 and 2024.
Yep.
So, Richard, as a tax man, could you tell us what are the merits of a two-stage hike and the downsides?
Thanks. So I guess from a positive perspective, then we have time between now and January for businesses to get ready. That's definitely welcomed to system changes and the other things that need to be worked through. The other merit, I suppose, from a consumer perspective, is some certainty around when it takes place, and also with it being 1%, then a less immediate, less painful increase in the first place. From a demerit perspective, from a downside, then now we have two increases or two steps. So business has to go through two cycles of system changes. And although they'll have been able to learn from the first set of changes, so it won't be so strange when they do it the second time around, nevertheless, there'll still be some costs incurred for the second cycle of changes, which are unavoidable, and they'll have to go through that. So I guess it's a balance between the needs of making sure that there is revenue, and the need not to I guess squash recovery from a consumer perspective, but at the same time also give business some certainty as to when those changes happen and how to plan for it, and then how to factor that into cost and budgeting over the next 2 calendar years.
Right. Anybody want to add to those observations on the two-step hike? Pros and cons?
I think very much agree with what Richard has said. I think in a way it was a bit of a pleasant surprise. I think a lot of people are saying that it may come earlier, and for it to come in only from January 2023 and in 2 steps is really very much welcomed by businesses, because it gives them more time to prepare for it, especially this period when they are under tremendous cost pressure. Electricity prices are up, logistic costs are up, supply chain is up. So in a way, deferring it by a bit helps the companies a lot, being able to cope over this period of heightened cost increases.
Right. If I may mention one more downside, which is that with a two-step hike, of course, the revenue takes longer to kick in.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to wait 2 years for the full revenue impact of the GST hike.
Yeah.
But talking of revenue, I think there's one point that is not much discussed, and that is the threshold for GST to be applicable to companies. And in Singapore, it's $1 million of turnover per year. In some other countries, it's much lower. Actually, most other countries, it's much lower. I think we were discussing earlier in Australia, it's about 80,000 Australian dollars turnover, which is roughly the same in Singapore dollars. In the UK, it's what?
83,000 pounds.
83,000 pounds. Even in Malaysia, which when it had the GST until it was replaced by the sales tax, the threshold was 500,000 ringgit, which works out about 170,000 or so Singapore dollars. So our threshold is really unusually high. Is this an anomaly? Because if we were to lower the threshold, we would significantly widen the tax base and get much more revenue. So any observations on that? Richard?
Yeah, let me go first. So is it an anomaly? Yes, I think so. Deliberately so, to be fair. It was set that way for a reason, and the reason was to reduce the compliance cost for smaller businesses and to try and keep the tax base at those companies that are sophisticated enough to be able to put systems in place and deal with it. The question, I suppose, in today's environment is whether that's still sustainable, and whether there is an argument to be made for reducing that rate down to something lower, not necessarily down to a UK or an Australia level of 80,000 Sing dollars or 100,000 Sing dollars, but maybe Malaysia level, bring it down to 500,000 Sing, and bring in another layer of I guess SMEs to help broaden out the base. So I think there is a case to be explored on whether that should move. And as Singapore explores where revenue is going to come from in the future, then it's something that I'm sure the policy makers would want to think about.
Yi Young, would you, as somebody who's been involved in the preparing past budgets, would you like to comment on the threshold?
I think we should not underestimate the administrative burden for the smaller businesses, particularly we are talking about the micro and small businesses with turnover below 1 million. The compliance cost is not small, so we need to be mindful of that. And we also need to remember that when we say they are not GST registered, it doesn't mean that they totally don't pay GST. they still pay GST on all their inputs. It's just that they cannot charge output GST and they don't pay the GST on their value add. Right? So it's not like the entire turnover is exempted from GST. They in a way have to absorb their input GST because they cannot offset it against the output GST. Yeah.
Any further thoughts, Barnabas?
Well, one important aspect of GST really is that despite the fact that it's a high threshold, as what you just mentioned, it still remains very sizable in terms of the budget breakdown. If we all know the three largest revenue components in the operating revenue, it's the personal income tax, corporate income tax, and the GST. And beyond operating revenue, we can see the NRIC as contributing to the revenue. But what I'm trying to say is that, despite the high threshold, it still remains to be one of a key revenue driver, for the Singapore government.
It could be even bigger.
Yeah.
With the smaller threshold. Okay. Desmond, anything to add? Is that?
No, I do agree with Young's point. I think as the economy evolves and grows, there is certain compliance costs that we need to be quite mindful of. It's not only just administration costs, but also compliance, including that you need to train manpower in order to do that. So rather than make a big move, I think it's okay to settle at this level first until the dust settles. Right? At the end, we still need to make sure that our businesses really focus on the business of doing business, which is to grow their pie, and hopefully they get to the $1 million range. And rather than put in administrative costs on them, and then they're less focused on what is really needed to grow. I think over the course of since the COVID started, I think small micro businesses, they have been extremely difficult, very badly hit across all different types of aspects, whether it's in manpower, whether it's in input cost. I think it's important that we bear that in mind as they grow. And quite importantly, we also do not want to erect very high barriers of entry for people wanting to come into entrepreneurship. So I think let's keep this dynamic, vibrant. Of course, we're quite mindful that we can get more revenue as a result, but I think more importantly, let's focus on growing the pie first.
Very good. Okay, another highlight of the budget was wealth tax. And here we have a property tax on high-end properties, mainly on high-end properties. I think before the budget, in the run-up, I think a lot of people were speculating that there would be a property gains tax, which is a tax on the gains from selling properties, the profits on selling properties. So what are the merits of a property tax versus a property gains tax, and what would be the impact on the property market? So anybody want to take that? Richard?
Yeah, I guess the property tax as it's based now is based on the annual value,
right.
Which is predictable and stable. If Singapore was to go down the road of taxing the gain, then there's incentives to manage the base, right? And kind of I guess move the entry level of the property value to reduce the amount of the tax. So there's a challenge in how you effectively administer a tax in that way and how you can police it. The way it's done now, then it's predictable and easy to administer. And I guess one of the things that from a tax administration perspective is you want maximum revenue for minimum enforcement, minimum policing. So the way it's set up now would seem to me to be a logical and kind of clear way to get an amount of revenue which reflects the value that property has both in the Singapore economy and to the revenue base more generally.
Just let me add on that. We must understand the spirit of the term wealth tax, and if we are going to talk about property gain tax, that would mean that it would be include that properties that are being sold on the open market, regardless of the annual value of the properties, might be hit as well. So the understanding behind the wealth taxes, not only the property tax, but also the luxury car tax and also the personal income tax that's above of 500,000 of annual to 1 million. We all know that. Basically, it's the spirit of it is to actually tax to make the Singapore tax system even more progressive. So that's the understanding behind having a wealth tax. and on the property tax when it comes to above a certain annual value. And what's interesting, Vikram, really is that the median annual value of HDB or for a 5-room flat, HDB 5-room flat is about 10,400, of annual value, and that means that all HDB flats in Singapore and over 70% almost 80% in fact of Singapore residents stays in HDB, and that means a huge part of the population is not being affected by the property tax.
Yeah.
Maybe let's add to that. I think the key difference between, say, the property gains tax or the ABSD versus the property tax is that the ABSD and the property gains applies only on transactions.
Right.
Whereas property tax is on a much wider base of the entire stock of properties.
Right.
And I think that makes for a more steady and a more steady tax base and tax revenue.
Right. But what about the impact on the property market? Because my own thinking here is that it won't affect the property market that much, because I think the super high-end, the people who own those kind of properties can well afford this tax. I mean, I don't think it's a big deal for them. So I don't think this will sort of cool the property market so much. I mean, there'll be some little bit of a pinch, but I don't think it will be significant. So whereas perhaps property gains tax above a certain level would be more effective in cooling the market. I don't know. That's my summary sort of take on that. But I don't know if any of you have a different view.
I mean, you are right. I mean, in a sense that going back to the spirit of the wealth tax, this is not a cooling measure.
Okay.
In essence, it's a wealth tax rather than a property cooling measure. So that basically, also answers why is it not a property gain tax rather than whatever we've seen in the budget. But maybe one group of people that could actually be affected from that, it's maybe the retirees, that actually stay, in a very large home, of let's just term it a luxury home above 30,000 of annual value, whereby they do not have, income, maybe passive income for the likes of it, but they are retirees, So I think one move, I don't know, it could be, is that they may actually start downgrading, to a property of below 30,000 of annual value home in order to not be affected by the property tax, and that means it could be a higher supply of luxury homes.
Right.
In the near term. Yeah.
Interesting, yeah. But let's look forward a bit. I mean, what about the future on wealth tax? I'm not sure that we are going to stop here. I mean, there are other possibilities for wealth taxes. I mean, we mentioned the property gains tax, which is possible. There may be additional cooling measures, which is actually off budget, but it could happen. There could be adjustments to stamp duties to make them more progressive, more tiered, or there even could be estate tax reinstated. Although a lot of tax advisors don't recommend it, but it used to be there, and a lot of countries have it. So, what are your thoughts on possible future wealth taxes, Mr. Lam?
Well, I think what you have said are all possibilities.
All possible.
Yeah. And,
you wouldn't rule any of those out.
Yeah, I don't think any of these can necessarily be ruled out.
Okay.
These are all possibilities. I think a lot depends also on what is the social compact we want to see in Singapore, and what is the role that the more wealthy see that they ought to play in society, and how much tax burden are they prepared to take up. Yeah. And of course, vis-a-vis also what the less well-off would expect the wealthy people to contribute to society, so that together we can build a stronger Singapore for all Singaporeans.
Right. Right. Any other thoughts? Future?
Our only resource, or our only non-natural resource, it's our reserves. We don't have natural resources in Singapore, and that's one of the whole reason why we could actually cushion and power Singapore forward during COVID-19. And we have actually withdrawn 20 years of savings in the last 2 years of fighting COVID-19. What I'm trying to say is that be it whether what kind of wealth tax may come, a huge part, I believe, in trying to generate enough revenue in Singapore it's just one word, growth. Because our GDP growth, how the nation and economy move forward, it's directly correlated to how much personal income tax and corporate income tax, and if not GST, that might be come into play. Take for example, during 2020 when COVID-19 was first hit in Singapore, the tax generation during that period of time has been affected because of poor growth in that period of time. So into the longer run, as per answering your question, it really pertains on how strong growth is. And I must say that I am very encouraged by how Singapore has tackled COVID-19 from then to now. And we have been very successful in trying to establish an endemic COVID-19 environment.
Right.
Yeah.
Final thoughts, Richard?
Yeah.
On
I think I agree with that view. So you can only too much tax stymies growth, right? So and Singapore has, from the start, then been very careful to make sure that they encourage an environment of investment, environment for business, to encourage people like me to come here and live here and spend money, and you need to balance the tax environment with encouraging people to want to come here and earn money and grow businesses, and so on. So I think there's always going to be that competition between what we need to do to encourage people and businesses, and what we need to do to recognise some of that income and revenue to help build Singapore as an amazing place to live and work for everybody.
Right.
That's always going to be the challenge, I think.
Right. Although some people would say that the wealth tax is more directed at inequality, at reducing inequality, and I think the trick is to balance that. I mean, against how it affects growth. I mean, you want to reduce inequality, yet do not negatively affect growth. So perhaps you have to strike that kind of balance. I don't know. But let's move on to another big part of the budget, which is qualifying salaries for employment pass holders and S-pass holders. They've been raised, and there's also tightening of dependency ratio ceilings. I think this has a direct impact on the business community. Mr. Lam, what is your feedback from your members on the impact of these increases in qualifying salaries?
I think, of course, if you ask businesses, they would rather it not be increased. Okay. But the increase, I think, is not unexpected. There has also already been a track record of such increases to keep pace with the salary levels of Singaporeans. And I think to ensure that we are bringing in the correct quality of foreign employees and to ensure that they complement the Singapore core. But I think the consistent message that the government is sending to businesses, and businesses do need to take heed, is that businesses need to continue to transform, to redesign jobs, and to ensure that they develop the local workforce and take in foreign employees more to complement the local workforce in areas where there is a skills shortage. And this could range from the higher end, like in the tech area where we face a severe shortage, but also maybe some of the mid-range jobs where they are not so popular with Singaporeans. And I think this is one area that we need to be a bit more mindful, that we do not, through increasing the qualifying salary, make it too difficult for companies that bring in particularly some of the S-pass holders to do jobs that is needed in Singapore, but which Singaporeans are not so inclined to do.
Right. I'm also concerned about these labor shortages that you mentioned. We have them in the tech industry, we have them in construction, we have them in the F&B business. And how will this affect the labor? I mean, wouldn't this exacerbate the shortages? And how would companies react to this? Would they have to increase salaries? Prices go up? Would that happen?
So there's two parts to it. One part of the shortage is because of COVID. And the border restriction.
Right.
So when 2020, when COVID hit, I think many companies in a way did the right things for Singaporeans, that when they had to reduce their workforce, they let go of the foreign employees first. So quite a number left Singapore to go home. But as the economy picks up and we need the workers, the borders are closed, so they couldn't come in. So that really led to play a big part in terms of the shortage. I think more so than the foreign worker policy itself. So as we reopen the borders, I think we are hopeful that we can continue to attract people to come in, and that should alleviate the situation a bit. But there are certain sectors, particularly for tech, where it is a global shortage. Where I think this one, the reality is that for us to compete, salaries need to go up, prices will have to go up for some of these sectors where there is really a global shortage of talent.
Right. Any other thoughts?
I think there are two parts as well. First and foremost, I agree with the higher business costs because if you look at the DRC ratio, currently it's 1 local worker to 7 foreign workers, and now in 2 years' time, and that's the consolation because businesses have 2 years to adjust to that, it will be 1 worker to 5 foreign workers. And if we just have a very simplistic view of, say, a company with 8 employees, 1 local and 7 foreign workers, that means that there will be somewhat of a 30% reduction in the workforce because you have to let go of 2 foreign workers because of the DRC ratio. Now, in order to actually hire more foreign workers, you have to hire more local workers, and that means that there could be higher business costs. That's one part. But I think more pertinent to the issue at hand, really, and the bigger question that we have to ask ourselves, really, is that if the companies cannot hire a physical foreign worker to make up the workforce, does that mean that they will actually move to hiring somebody overseas? And this people, given COVID-19, and we can argue that COVID-19 is the key enabler to making businesses more digitalized in the current age. And that would actually mean that companies may be more incentivized, perhaps, to actually hire a foreign worker from overseas.
You mean a remote worker?
Yeah, remote worker from overseas. Yeah.
Desmond, you're the NTUC, so this is right up your street.
Indeed.
My question to you really specifically is, will local workers be sufficiently trained and able to replace the fewer numbers of foreign workers that'll probably happen in the future?
I think to view the entire manpower move this time around, I think there are a couple of messages that we need to recognize first. And there are 2 parts to it. One is at the higher end of what we call foreign talent, and the other one is complementary manpower at the lower end, probably lesser skilled, unskilled type. So at the higher end, I think the message is loud and clear. Singapore is still welcoming of foreign talent, helping to grow the Singaporean economy. I think the message has not changed. I think it's quite important to reinforce that. Now, that sub-message to that is, while we are open to foreign talent, we are still very, very mindful that we are looking for quality and complementarity. And this is quite critical, especially for 2 groups of workers. One is our younger workers, the other one is our mid-career people trying to make career switches. I think for a lot of younger Singaporeans going through tertiary educations, coming out, they're always looking forward to, now, where can I strike a good career? And I think this price changes is an important signal to them that, okay, can companies give our younger workers that fair shot in life at careers that they may be interested in? Could be in tech, could be in finance. I think that was an important signal. The other one is on the mid-career or PMEs. I think they've been quite squeezed for some time. We want to make sure that they're not priced out of the market, that eventually they will get the message that when we bring in companies and create jobs, ultimately we want to make sure that Singaporeans do get that lion's share of good jobs. So then at the low end, I think that is where things get a different perspective. Our productivity for quite a lot of the sectors have been fairly low. And you can say that for the construction industry, compared to the developed countries, especially in OPEC, we have been fairly down the charts. Over the course of the last 2 years, quite ironically, things have improved because you don't get access to so much manpower, you relook at your business process, and companies have been trying to survive on just a leaner manpower structure. And that in some sense have helped. So now those measures are going to help these companies to accelerate and continue that momentum, that we can actually do more with just less. And this one does have its benefits to our own social infrastructure. I think that's quite critical. Now, your question is, can the local manpower fill up the gap? I think there will be some adjustment period. And so that's why there's certain time that's provided for the changes to happen. You do need our local manpower to train. For example, I think we're quite excited that the mid-career guys can now pivot, and they're arranging for more attachment programs for mid-career people to fill up those jobs. I think by and large, our Singaporean worker, they do want to be able to make career switches, but they will need to have some adjustment time. I think that will allow them to have that balance, that okay, we're going to set things a bit higher, we're going to give you a shot, and there'll be programs and stuff to support you in that journey. Will manpower shortages and tension go away? I think globally, you look at it, it's always inherent tension because we're always in a competition for getting better manpower. But at the same time, we always must be quite mindful that as we bring in quality investment, we want the companies to do well, but at the same time, these jobs must eventually feature our Singaporean workforce because we grow the Singaporean economy to benefit Singaporeans. I think that is that message that I think we felt it so strongly over this budget. And actually, it's not something that is just here now, but over the course of the last few years, tripartite partners have been working quite tightly to make sure that we keep a close eye focus on capability transfers, giving our people a fair shot at those good jobs.
So, just very briefly, Desmond, just to follow up, there's not much in this budget for gig workers. Yeah. What can be done for them? Because what might happen is that companies might just start hiring more contract workers to cope with higher salary costs. So they switch to more contract. So more gig workers could end up working. So what can be done about this category of workers?
Okay, so
briefly.
So it's something that I am very passionate about, something I look at quite extensively. There are two separate groups of them. I think one is your management consultants, your guys doing higher end stuff. And then the other ones are the platform guys, your delivery people, your couriers. And I think that by and large, the growth of this platform work has helped Singapore quite a fair bit. Without platform work, I think Singapore would be a very difficult time during the deepest of lockdowns, SMMs, the inability to go down to the markets and buy stuff. So it has served its function. But now that we're moving to a building for the future, we need to start to look at the structural problems, and I think they're quite severe. Firstly, chiefly is this job provides a good discretionary income, reasonable for quite a lot of people. But it has inherent risk that the workers themselves are underwriting in full most of the times. Now, why do I say that? There are actually 3 to 4 areas of interest. Firstly, bargaining powers. Right? The bargaining powers is absolutely lopsided. Right? Some people say, it's gig work. You can choose to work or you can choose not to work. Actually, the reality is not so clear. Many of these workers invested money, usually on installments on buying motorbikes, PMDs. They structure their entire lives around gig work. They cannot just pack up and leave when the employment terms or the remuneration terms change. It's not so easy. And because they're stuck in this ecosystem, even when terms are not balanced, they continue to have to be stuck with it, which is a real problem. Second one, I feel that we need to look at is the skilling part of it. The skills.
Okay.
We have broadly two groups. One was quite happy to be in gig work because of flexibility. They see it as a longer term thing. The other one is, I really want to transfer to something more permanent. So for these two group of workers, I think firstly we need to skill this current group who wants to stay inside. If things changes, can you maneuver? The second one is, can transitionary support be provided for those who wants to leave the system? Because it is a tough life. It's not easy chasing after deliveries. The last one, which is something we need to look into, is retirement adequacy for these workers. Because I think it's a can being kicked down the road. Discretionary income will be affected if employers and employees both pay for it. But we need to take care of the retirement and housing needs.
Okay.
So I think tripartite partners need to work quite closely on this. But I don't think it's something that one budget can settle.
Yep.
Hopefully in our COS debate we can go deeper into that.
Thank you.
There's an ongoing work stream on this. I'm part of the advisory committee on platform workers, and precisely looking at these issues is a tripartite effort.
Okay.
And it is not easy because the platforms, the workers all have different preferences. Even among the platform workers, some would rather have more take-home pay and no CPF. Some worry more about the longer term retirement adequacy.
Very good. Since you have the floor, I mean, this is up your street, and that's SMEs. There's a slew of incentives for SMEs in this budget, starting with the 500 million business support package, but there's also very specific schemes. But I just want to focus on the main problems with SMEs. I think Finance Minister Wong mentioned two of them. One is that SMEs do not invest much in R&D. And the other is that it's been difficult for SMEs to scale up. Why do we have these problems? Why don't they invest in R&D? And why is it difficult for them to scale up? There are measures in the budget to address these issues, but could we understand what the problem is?
I think when we look at SMEs, we need to recognize that it's actually not a homogeneous group. It's a very wide range, all the way from those under 1 million revenue to those that are hitting 100 million annual revenue. So it's a wide range. And we do have some SMEs that are very progressive, that has been investing in R&D, investing in overseas market, and are growing well, and grown in a way graduated from SME category. But we also do have quite a number that are the more micro and small, that are facing more difficulties. This could include some, for example, the shops in the heartlands. It could be some of the smaller businesses in the more traditional areas. Many of which are family-based, where some of it they also face struggles where the children don't want to take over the business. Right? So there are the segment that faces difficulty. But I think on the whole, we do see encouraging sign that there are SMEs that are investing in R&D. And I think one of the things that we very much welcome in the budget announcement is that the ITE and polytechnics are being given more resources so that they can help more SMEs in terms of innovation and transformation. And I think in our experience working with SMEs, linking them up with the polytechnics, with the universities, the ITE and the polytechnics are very well placed to help our SMEs with very practical solutions. Very often what the SMEs need is not so much the research part, but the development part, right? What we call the big D rather than the big R type, because they need something that is closer to market. Because if you tell them, well, you invest in this, it's a 10-year payoff, it's quite hard for them to look at it in that sense. A big company may be able to, but for SMEs, they need something that if they invest in it, it needs a payoff in a shorter term for them to see the value in doing it. So the innovation, the development part becomes a lot more important, and that's something that the ITE polytechnics are well placed to do. So in the past year, we have been actually matching some companies to work with polytechnics. So we are glad that they are getting more resources so they can do even more to help more SMEs.
Just let me add on that. Yeah, just let me add on that. We are in a year whereby a lot of bad things have happened in the past. Right? We have seen COVID-19 for over 2 years, but given COVID-19, we have forgotten one very big aspect, and that's the trade frictions between US and China during the pre-COVID-19. So I would dare say that we have gone through, say, a double whammy of economic mishaps.
And it's not over yet.
And it's not over yet. Yeah. It's not over yet. But what I can say really is kudos to the SMEs who have stayed afloat during this double whammy. And for that matter, I think one very important enabler for SMEs to stay afloat is the word capital. And we have really seen in the budget like the temporary bridging loans. That's in the budget to actually help SMEs and companies and companies in general to have adequate capital to be present to expand and and also develop into the longer run. Going into the R&D, given the fact that they have already faced a double whammy, of mishaps, so-called, I think a possible mindset that they have right now, it's possibly survival, rather and as what my colleague has mentioned, really being having an R&D project that has a more shorter term payout, which they must see in a short term in order to actually validate the development of the R&D itself. So it's a very fine balance, I must say, between survival at this juncture and R&D.
Right.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
I find the comments interesting. So I with my corporate secretarial function, then I see quite a lot of startup, and I also operate in the innovation space. So I see quite a lot in the startup ecosystem. and that's very vibrant, right? So financial technology, fintech, agri-tech, so advanced food startups, that kind of thing, pharma technology. So they're not SMEs in the sense that perhaps we might think about when we think about into the heartlands and that angle. But that's a very vibrant sector of Singapore's economy, and Singapore is a very popular place to come and do that for access to the financial capital and the investment dollars and the R&D and the skill set of Singaporeans in particular in helping to build those companies. And I think that's a very strong area for Singapore that we will see more growth in. So the fact that the budget has focused on R&D in that more widely, I think will help encourage that level of the ecosystem. The initial startup, the Series A, Series B funding kind of businesses to come here and invest and look to grow.
Right. So, Richard, while you have the floor, there's the issue of base erosion and profit shifting,
Yes.
BEPS 2.0.
Yes.
Under the OECD, I think 137 countries have basically agreed that there would be a global minimum tax
Yes.
on large multinational companies. The minimum tax would be 15%, which probably kick in next year or the year after. And we have, I think, 1,800 large MNCs in Singapore, most of whom pay way below the global minimum tax. In terms of effective tax rate, they're probably in single digits for many of them. So those incentives are going to become redundant for these companies. And I think the Minister Wong talked about consulting with MNEs to figure out what could replace these incentives, how these things could be replaced. What are your thoughts as a tax expert on what the options are? I mean, and what do you feel multinationals would prefer to see in place of these existing tax incentives?
So I guess a point then BEPS is not my area of specialty. I focus on indirect taxes more. But I think business generally, is looking for some consistency and some certainty. Wherever Singapore lands with this, and I think it's a very specific issue for Singapore. Many other countries don't approach encouraging MNCs into their jurisdictions in the same way. So it's a very specific issue for Singapore. These MNCs are large and significant employers, and therefore making sure that they don't get scared away and continue to see Singapore as the place to be from a HQ perspective and from an Asia footprint perspective is very important. Where this lands, I don't know. I guess the challenge is that Singapore is is a small player in a much larger argument, and there's some very significant, weighty countries pulling to try and get what they want out of the system. The US brought this in for very specific economic reasons for the US. Europe has a very clear view on what they want to achieve out of the this BEPS Pillar 1, Pillar 2 debate. I think Singapore is has a great position as a place in Asia. What exactly they can do to protect their position, I think, is going to require an awful lot of discussion and some very serious conversations. I think it's going to be a long and perhaps fraught debate. Okay. And it's only just starting, I think, is my view.
Mr. Lam, I guess you have a lot of members who are large multinationals. What is the feedback from them that you get? What would they like to see?
I think on the tax, they do recognize that this is a global thing. It's not Singapore alone. So of course it does, if they have to pay more taxes, it does affect our competitiveness. But I think we must also remember that our competitiveness is not built on tax rate alone, right? But really the entire business ecosystem, the business system in Singapore, our connectivity to the region. I think we still have a very compelling proposition as a regional headquarters because of our connectivity and our familiarity with the region and the entire business ecosystem, the certainty of governance, certainty of government policy. These all remains to be very strength of Singapore. that I think we continue to be in a good position, notwithstanding that the tax rate we may have to equalize because of BEPS, but we still remain to offer a compelling proposition for MNEs to be based in Singapore.
There's no danger of them running away because of...
Well, we must never be complacent.
Never be
Right? So if we don't keep up with the type of certainties that we offer companies, and that also includes the certainty and the flexibility to bring in the foreign employees that they need, then this may affect it. But I think if we continue with what we are doing as a whole, we still have a good proposition for MNEs.
Right. Would you like to add to that, Barnabas?
Well, I mean, I do agree. I think what's important really is that we do not only compete on taxes, as what has been mentioned, and I think also one of the argument is that with the rise in carbon taxes, will that actually affect, the competitiveness of Singapore? Let's not go into that first. Let's talk about the corporate tax for that matter. We compete on other issues. We have a very strong geographical location whereby some say that we are a gateway to Asia, if not ASEAN. We also compete in efficiency, value-added services. We have a very strong local, workforce, and of course the non-corruption, approach, as well as policy transparency. And these are all aspects that foreign companies, if not the corporate companies in Singapore, do actually benefit from. And that basically means, that we still have, a very more compelling argument for companies to come into Singapore, if not stay, in Singapore, to actually, fuel Singapore's growth in the long run. Yeah.
Very good. I want to move on to another highlight of the budget, which is the carbon tax, right? Now, okay, the carbon tax is going to jump from $5 per ton of CO2 emissions currently to $25 in 2024. That's a five-fold jump. I think earlier the government had telegraphed that it's probably going to be $10 to $15,
right.
but instead we've got $25. And then there's a glide path to 2030, which is also quite steep. So there's going to be a carbon tax of $50 to $80 by 2030. So this looks quite daunting. This is quite an ambitious policy. And my question here is, will it be too much for companies to bear, even with the transitional help? A five-fold jump right away. I think if I were running a company, I'd say, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? But what do you think? Do you think companies can handle this? And if you were running a company, what would you be doing? So, Mr. Lam.
Sure. I think a lot depends on the transition package. I think it remains to see what are the details of the transition package. Minister Wong did say that the carbon tax is not meant to be a revenue measure, that the intent is that the revenue collected will be plowed back in decarbonization efforts and in the transition package. So how much of it can benefit companies, I think that remains to be seen, and that will be the key. But I think it's also important to remember not to view carbon tax in isolation, but in terms of the entire movement towards sustainability. Even without the carbon tax, businesses are under pressure from their investors, from their customers to be more sustainable, to be more green. And the carbon tax in a way helps to price in the cost of carbon emission in making so that companies can make the decision with it properly priced in. So I think it's important that companies need to push ahead with efforts in terms of sustainability, in terms of decarbonization. And I think depending on what form the transition package comes in, the next few years really is an opportunity for companies to review how their operations to become more sustainable. And this one will put them in a stronger state for the future. And I think it's also important to look at it, not just in terms of sustainability in business, but to go beyond it to look at sustainability as a business. How can companies leverage on sustainability for growth and tap on the green growth opportunities in the region, so that in a way, by being a bit of a front runner, an early adopter, we can actually position our companies to be in a better position to help other companies in the region and to seize the opportunities as there is increasing awareness and demand for sustainability beyond in our region and beyond.
But Richard, I think you had a view earlier on carbon tax. What would companies need to do to sort of cope with this huge jump?
Yeah, so I think Mr. Lam summed it up very nicely. I was reflecting earlier about the balance between the manufacturing in particular, which is where this is really going to hit, and whether they want to stay here, whether they want to move some of that manufacturing offshore. There are countries around us, there are places around us that don't have such a high level of carbon tax, and so maybe some of them will look at, do I move some facility out of where it's so expensive, maybe keep my headquarters here, keep my admin here, and shift some of that offshore. So I think there's always that challenge. We've talked about balance a lot, so I think in all of this tax policy, then it's always a balance around doing the right thing and making sure that we can effect change, but at the same time not chasing business away and damaging the core. And we come back to what Desmond was talking about earlier around making sure that everybody has a good skills route to a skilled future. And that's the challenge I would see, is making sure that we don't pluck so many feathers, right? that the bird flies away, right?
Barnabas, you had some thoughts on this as well?
Well, if the bird has no feathers, it can't fly. So. So I think there are two ways to look at it. One is from the business perspective, and one is from the environment perspective. First and foremost, what's important to really understand really is that despite the carbon tax at current $5 and eventually $25 in the next few years, it still remains very low compared to international standards. Like for example, in Europe, it's above 100 Sing dollars per ton, of greenhouse emissions, and that basically gives us a very good understanding of how competitive we can be in terms of Singapore being a country with no natural resources, but yet, given that we have a somewhat relatively low carbon tax compared to the other developed countries, we can still compete. That's one. But also another way to look at it is that we have to be more responsible when it comes to be more responsible in being green, because eventually if we do export goods to these countries, we may have to actually meet up to their green benchmark or framework, and that will be additional taxes if we do not meet their standards. The second way, which is the environment issue, and it's not been brought up yet, but if we do recall previous budgets, something called rising sea levels, has been on the text of budgets, and it's about having a more longer term perspective of how much Singapore can benefit from being green. Because let's just face it, if with the CBD being so close to the sea, and if there's rising sea levels beyond what we can bear, there'll be no more CBD anymore. So that is really one of the reasons as to being green for really in a longer term perspective. I know it's somewhat less obvious at this juncture, given that the US-China frictions and COVID-19 is somewhat still around the corner. It's still felt being at this juncture, but ultimately we have to think for our children and children's children when it comes to business and environment.
Right.
Yeah.
Desmond, do you have any thoughts on the carbon tax? How does it affect workers? Because workers would need to be retrained to work in greener industries.
Yeah. In fact, this is something that as a labour movement we need to look into quite closely, because it not only just it's a transformation, it's transition from carbon intensive to trying to decarbonize. Certain sectors will be very much affected. Oil and gas, we have very significant presence here. But at the same time, there are important opportunities that will open up, jobs that were not available before. So how do we manage that transition now? I think it's quite critical. I think that is job number one we need to do. The second one really is on the whole matter of ESG. I think ESG itself is an important investment topic that is of material importance to businesses and workers. Businesses don't just look into whether you have lower, higher carbon taxes. Of course, it matters. But when now people start to invest, how aligned are you in your policies versus what you say? If you say that you're big on ESG, but your carbon taxes are nowhere near where you're saying, I think that affects investment downstream. So I think that's something that we need to pay close attention to.
Right. Very good. I think I just got a signal that we're running out of time. So let me come to the penultimate question, which is this. After all what we've heard from our discussion, could you tell me what would you have liked to see in the budget that wasn't there? What is missing from your wish list? Mr. Lam.
Well, I think there's a limit to what can be in a budget speech. So we do look forward to some of this hopefully coming out in the Committee of Supply.
Right.
But I think two areas will be more help for SMEs in terms of cybersecurity. With greater digitization, cybersecurity is a much bigger problem now. Second, linked to the point about promoting innovation, is help for SMEs in terms of intangible assets and intellectual properties. I think that will allow them to better monetize their innovation.
Barnabas, what was missing from your wish list?
I think less than what was missing in the wish list, but more so of what I feel that should be addressed more really is the issue of structural unemployment. Given the fact that COVID-19 has dealt us a blow in the sense that jobs have been left obsolete, and new jobs are created. And right now, especially the issue of young to mid-career workers, the bigger question really is how are they going to fit into a new normal in an endemic COVID environment, new normal going forward in the many years to come, and while we are comforted there's this mid-career, policies that will actually help mid-career workers and much. I think what I would hope to see really is that the policies that actually to be designed to really help the mid-career workers specifically to be part and to be more and to be relevant in tomorrow's economy. Yeah.
Desmond?
I think for me it would be the younger workers and the COVID generation. I think we have for 2 years younger
Sorry,
people.
what is the COVID generation?
COVID generation belongs to the younger group of people who are still in the education system.
Okay.
But their lives have been massively changed in two aspects. What they used to learn might not be relevant because things have accelerated so quickly. And secondly, their aspirations have changed. Greater sense of what they think is a purposeful career, what they think is what is resilience. You do see that some younger workers are a lot more anxious about their future, both in terms of opportunities that they can now get on board, and also a greater realization that my skills are going to erode a lot faster. So I know there are a lot of things that we do builds for the future, but we have hope for a piece whereby, now how do we help them to navigate? Because there are both opportunities and threats that I think we need dedicated attention to. Hopefully during the budget we get a bit more discussion on that.
Right. Richard, what was on your wish list that didn't happen?
Yeah, so I think broadly speaking, my wish list was GST and some certainty, and so I was very pleased that that came through. But I think what I would agree with the last two speakers. So what I felt was missing from a personal perspective was the piece around skills and the continued transformation and upskilling of Singapore's workforce to bring them into new careers and to continue to kind of give them a sense of the future and a sense that there is real opportunity. Not that I'm saying there is not, but there that there where they need to go and what they need to do and how technology is going to help them and where they should be focusing their time to be ready. That bit I think probably needs a bit more drawing out from the budget, and maybe in the COS then that can perhaps be further expanded upon.
Very good, thank you. And the absolutely last question, this is actually almost a yes or no answer,
Okay.
but you can elaborate in a sentence or two. Are you bullish about Singapore's growth prospects over the next 3 years? Barnabas, you had mentioned the importance of growth.
Yes, a
So you
resounding
go first.
yes.
Resounding yes?
Yes, a resounding yes, I must say. With COVID-19 at this juncture right now, Singapore has shown its resilience and its ability to cope with the pandemic. We have one of the highest vaccination rates in the world. We have policy foresight in making it so with policies that really in the budget itself to actually see medium to long-term priorities being met for our future generations, and so I think Singapore is very well positioned to be bullish in the next many years or so.
Mr. Lau?
Yes,
Are you bullish?
fully agree. Very
Really?
much so. I think we are in a good position to be able to seize the opportunities that are out there. But of course, we all know that we cannot be isolated from all the downside risks in the world, whether is it COVID situation, Ukraine, or whatever else may come up. But I think whatever out there, we are in a good position to make the best of it.
Definitely so.
I'm sorry?
Definitely so.
Definitely
I think.
so.
I
We are
think
all
for two
positive.
reasons. I think one, from the employers, workers, and government, we understood how to work better during a crisis. I think that's quite critical for anyone trying to invest in Singapore, that you have tripartite partners who understand what is going on. Second thing is, I think there's a greater level of trust built between Singaporeans and the government. And that is that shining light that we need to build on. Because regardless of how COVID changes, the people have sufficient trust that things will work as long as we work together. And it has shown that the way we are emerging from this crisis in a much stronger position compared to quite a lot of countries. I think that will give both workers and companies a lot of confidence.
Right. And Richard, from your perspective, are you bullish over the next 3 years?
Definitely. I think Singapore is poised very nicely to benefit from the rebound in global economy, and Singapore has many strengths. A very vibrant financial sector. I think we'll see some really good times, some really good opportunities for growth for Singapore in the future.
Fantastic. On that positive note, I must thank all our panelists for sharing their views. It's been a very rich discussion. So thank you, gentlemen. And at this point, I have to bring the panel to a close. Thank you, viewers, for tuning in.